Russian and Asian Studies, School of International Studies, JNU, and Dr. Padita Mukherjee, former um, visiting professor, State University of New York, United States of America, will speak on this issue. On behalf of the entire college, I welcome you all to this webinar, sir. Before we begin, let me make a few announcements. The participants, except the speakers, are requested to mute themselves and keep their video off to avoid distraction. Feedback link will be available in the college website, that is bncollege.co.in, after 8 o'clock in the evening for 24 hours, and e-certificates will be provided after submission of the feedback form. We will have the question and answer session towards the end of the webinar, and precise and specific questions mentioning the speaker's name are solicited. Now, I request our principal, sir, Dr. Dhruva Chakraborty, to make his inaugural lecture. Over to you, sir.
So thank you, Dr. Gautam Roy. A very good morning to all the participants. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar organized by Department of Political Science of our college. A brief introduction about BN College for those who are not familiar with this college. The college was established in 1946 under as an affiliating college under Calcutta University at the time, and in the town of Dhubri, which is in the bank of river Brahmaputra and the headquarter town of Dhubri district. Dhubri district is in the western part of Assam, sharing international border with Bangladesh. When the college was established, it was the only center of higher education in western part of Assam. Now we can boast of various alumni of this college occupying various prominent positions, particularly in state and national level. And right now the college is offering UG and PG courses in science and arts. We are extremely privileged and extremely thankful to Dr. Ranjan Kumar, School of International Studies, and Dr. Padita Mukherjee, former visiting professor, State University of New York, for according their consent to act as resource person in this particular webinar. We are welcoming you, sir, to this webinar, and we are, as mentioned, we are very much thankful to you for acting as resource person. Study of foreign policy of a country is a very, very fascinating subject, and the entire world is changing very fast nowadays, and to cope up with this, the foreign policy is also changing rapidly. I hope that the discussions and deliberations in this particular webinar will be helpful for all of us to understand the trajectory of Indian foreign policy, and it will be extremely helpful for the students who are participating in this webinar. With that note, welcoming you all again, I would like to conclude, and I would like to declare this webinar as open. Thank you. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your address. Again, I request our esteemed participant to mute themselves and keep their video off to avoid distraction. Now, I would like to request Professor Sudarshan Roy, former head, Department of Political Science, BN College, Dhubri, to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Ranjan Kumar. Over to you, sir. Sudarshan Roy, sir. Sir, please proceed, sir. Sir, unmute yourself.
Sudarshan sir, please unmute yourself.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
Hello?
yes,
Yes,
yes.
sir.
Okay. Good morning to all of you. I feel honored to welcome you all to today's international webinar on trajectory of India's foreign policy, the road ahead, organized by Department of Political Science, BN College, Dhubri. I feel privileged to introduce before you our honorable speakers of today's webinar. Our first speaker of today's webinar is Dr. Ranjan Kumar, Associate Professor, Center for Russian and Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Dr. Ranjan Kumar teaches in School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi. He has a vast experience of studying and teaching in a number of countries, including Russia and United States. His latest book, The Emerging Structure, Institutions and Processes, was published by Holgrave Macmillan, London. He writes regularly for Financial Express and other newspapers on issues related to politics and India's foreign policy. He teaches, his lectures are also available on YouTube. Over to Dr. Gautam Rai. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Sudarshan Roy. Now, I would like to request Dr. Rajan Kumar to present his delivery. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Gautam Rai. I'm feeling honored and privileged that. Can you hear me, all of you, clearly? Gautamji, can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. Thank
Yes,
you.
yes.
Yeah. So that was just to focus. So thank you so much, Gautamji, for this inviting me for this lecture. I would like to thank Principal Sahab, Dhruv Chakravarti Sahab, for giving me this opportunity to interact with such esteemed colleagues. HOD, former HOD, Sudarshan Roy Sahab, and Rizbul Alam, the HOD. So I'm extremely grateful to all of you. When I got this invitation, I had absolutely no connection with Gautamji, but when I got this call from him, so I was delighted. I said, this is the best opportunity for me to interact with our colleagues in Assam because I have never actually spoken in Assam. So this Corona and this COVID and new technology has given me this opportunity to interact with all of you. And I must thank Gautamji and Principal Sahab for giving me this opportunity. And today, what I'm going to do is that I'll give you a brief outline of India's neighborhood policy, India's policy in South Asia. I have also made a brief presentation for all of you so that, in case the voice is not clear or in case there is any problem, you can look at the slide. So I'll start with my slide here, and somebody, one of you, please confirm if you can see the slide. Please just somebody tell me whether you can see the slide or not.
Yes, it's coming, sir. It's coming.
All right. You can see India's neighborhood policy.
Yes, 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 definitely. Clearly, sir.
All right. Yeah. So I'll start from here. That what I'm going to discuss today in my presentation is there are 3-4 major concepts that I would like to flag for clarification. First is the concept of neighborhood. But how do you define a neighborhood? How do you understand neighborhood? And what is Modi's neighborhood first policy as has been propounded since he came to power in 2014?
Sir, may I interrupt you?
Yes,
Sir,
yes.
actually, you have to reduce your main screen, the first screen.
Okay, can you see it here?
Minimize. Now, I can see, but you have to minimize the main screen.
All right.
Not the presentation screen, sir, the other screen. The screen of the computer.
Okay, so can you see it here now?
Yes, yes, now it is coming.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
So
yes,
can I start now?
Yes, sir.
All right.
It is not in the slideshow mode, I think. You can take it to slideshow mode. It will come in bigger size.
Is it okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
All right. Okay, so I'll start with these broad concepts that I would like to broadly define this concept of neighborhood for India, because this is a very contested concept. And as I'll show you that how this concept of neighborhood has changed over the time. If I start from 1947, it has changed completely. So I'll start with that. I'll talk about Modi's neighborhood first policy, from 2014 to the changes which have taken place recently. I'll also talk about some of the multilateral and bilateral initiatives. For instance, for example, SAARC, BIMSTEC, BBIN, and ARF of Southeast Asia. Then what is important to understand in today's context is also the great power rivalry which is taking place in South Asia, and how China has become a resident power in South Asia, which has raised India's concern, and a great power politics that you can see that how US and China, both the countries, are playing roles in South Asia. Finally, I'll conclude by saying that how there are limitations of framing diplomacy in cultural terms, the kind of the civilizational link that we try to create sometimes, so that is resented by many of the neighbors. So I'll briefly point out that point towards the end. Coming back to South Asia and what we consider by neighborhood, first let me clarify that South Asia is not a static concept. If I take you back to 1947, so before that there was no South Asia. Let me tell you, it was only the British Empire, it was British India, and not South Asia. So South Asia, which is a very popular term today, and all the students and all of us know what South Asia means. So it is essentially a post-colonial construct, which is based on the imagination of the past, which is based on the British understanding of this Indian continent. And that has somehow percolated, that has continued in the writings of the nationalist historians during the freedom struggle, and also in the later period or the post-colonial period when India became independent. So the term became popular only after 1947. So South Asia is a product of the broader Cold War politics, where Asia was divided into different regional blocks. And as you can see that there was the Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Middle East, East Asia, etc. So all these regional the conceptualization that started during the Cold War period. This is not to say that South Asia we do not have connection. We do have historical connection, we do have cultural connection, we do have the political territorial connection. But the concept of South Asia is very shifty, and it keeps changing from one to other. I'll tell you how. South Asia is not just a territorial concept. It is a product, as I told you, of a broader global and regional processes. And that ambiguity continues. For instance, if somebody defines South Asia as the proximity of the neighbors with India, so then I'll ask you that how come Afghanistan is a part of SAARC, South Asia, and Myanmar is not a part of South Asia? I'll ask you that how China is not a part of South Asia. So, South Asia is not just about the territorial proximity. It's not just a territorial concept. It is a concept which has a history, which has geography, but more importantly, which has political processes. The way it evolved during the British period and also in the post-colonial period in India, and that ambiguity, let me tell you, continues even today. India, for instance, as you can see that SAARC was the major organization of South Asia, started in 1985. But now India, Modi's government and India in general, India is trying to redefine South Asia, redefine the regional grouping by creating BIMSTEC and a sub-regional grouping, which is BBIN. BIMSTEC, I'll give you the details later. So that ambiguity continues even today. Why, for instance, even if in British India, Myanmar was part of British India, but Myanmar is not part of South Asia in today's context. Myanmar is part of Southeast Asia and ASEAN. And Southeast Asia, that concept became popular during the Cold War period when entire Southeast Asia became the part of the American alliance system. So that ambiguity continues about the reason. What is happening and the reason why this South Asian region has become extremely important. There are a number of factors. And what we see in terms of security, there is a structural shift which is taking place in this region. And what happened, in the post-Cold War period, that US has abandoned Pakistan and US has started quoting India to counterbalance China. And that is impacting the entire security architecture in the region. What we see today in South Asia is that great power rivalry is taking place and which is likely to intensify in the future. So these are some of the broader assumptions that I'm making it here. And with that, after that, I'll start the discussion. So number one is that the structural shift in security architecture which is taking place. Number two, the possession of nuclear weapons that prevents the possibility of a full-fledged war in South Asia, but it increases the possibility of limited war. So what we are seeing here, because of the great power rivalry and the kind of structural constraints that we have, that there is no possibility of a real full-fledged war between India and Pakistan or between India and China. But what has happened that the chances of limited war or the chances of proxy conflict that has increased in the South Asian region, and we have seen that in the case of Pulwama, post-Pulwama, the India-Pakistan conflict that started. We have seen that in 2017 in Doklam crisis between Bhutan and China, and how India went in support of Bhutan, and now we are witnessing in the Himalayan Ladakh region between India and China. We all know that the full-fledged war between India and China is very unlikely, but we all know that this kind of conflict is going to continue in future. So what I'm trying to say is that because of the nuclear deterrence, big war, the real war is very unlikely, but limited war is very, very likely in the future also. And that creates a kind of instability in the South Asian region. What we see today is that a new kind of alliance is emerging, where you see the China-Pakistan economic alliance, and that will gradually convert into security alliance also. And US-India, the kind of military agreements which are taking place. And because of China as a factor, this alliance is going to intensify in the future. But the problem is that none of the alliances, these two alliances, they are not very durable or stable alliances. China has a number of problems with Pakistan. In Uyghur region, this from where the CPEC the BRA project passes from that region. And comes to Pakistan, but then there's an issue. Uyghurs are always there's a tension, there is a secessionist, separatist tendency in that region. Again in Balochistan, and ideologically, Pakistan and China are not very natural partners. One is an Islamic state, and other one is a communist state. So how long that partnership will continue, we do not really know. India and United States, they are also have number of issues where their interests do not necessarily converge. And we have seen in the case of Iran, we have seen it in the case of Russia, that how India is close to Iran and how India is also very close to Russia. But that creates some kind of tension with the United States. And the kind of trade war or some kind of tariff war which is taking place between India and US also. So we are not really certain that how durable this alliance would be. And in the absence of those alliances, what we are seeing in South Asia is a very unstable kind of politics which is playing out in South Asia. So with that broader assumption in mind, I'll come specifically to India's foreign policy, India's grand strategy, and then I'll come to India's bilateral and multilateral policies in the region. So if I have to define India's grand strategy, or what is India's vision of broader foreign policy and how that vision connects with the neighborhood. So we'll have to keep in mind the three concentric circles. So India considers itself in terms of three circles. First is the immediate neighborhood, where the N8 countries, the neighboring countries, they are become very, very important, including Myanmar also in N8. Second is the extended neighborhood, and that includes Southeast Asia, and that also includes Central Asia and countries of Gulf, for instance, Iran, etc., UAE. So that is the second circle that and that's how India considers its influence in the region. And third is the entire global stage. So India divides the entire world into three stages. One is the immediate neighborhood, the first circle, The second is the extended neighborhood in broader Asia, and also in the Indian Ocean Rim and Bay of Bengal. And third, of course, is the global stage. And this is not new. Number of scholars right from the historical period, Kautilya's Rajmandala theory, if you remember, so that talks about this kind of circle. Then 1996 Gujarat Doctrine, when he tried to explain India's foreign policy in terms of doctrines, so he also thought in terms of these concentric circles. And new scholars like Rajamohan, etc., they all talk about these concentric circles the way India understand. So what, if you see the grand strategy of India, India wants to become a global power. India thinks that the rightful place as a global power that has been denied by the Western dominance in the Cold War period, and that continues even today. India thinks it is entitled to play a larger role in the global governance, but because of the Western dominance in the international institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and the United Nations Security Council, etc. So the Western dominance has kind of precluded the possibility of India becoming a part of this global governance. So India resents that kind of situation, and India has been demanding a larger role in the global governance. And that's why India is searching for the multipolarity. India's foreign policy always emphasizes some kind of multipolarity. India is not happy with the emerging bipolarity where US is number one power and that is being contested by China. India would not like to be dictated either by United States or by China. So India supports a policy where a multipolarity can be achieved. In the recent years, what you witness in India's grand strategy is that there's a gradual shift. If I talk of the Cold War period, all of you know that in the Cold War period, there was non-alignment was the basic framework which guided India's foreign policy. And India wanted to play the role of leadership in the third world countries with the Soviet inclination. That India was neutral, India was non-aligned, but of course, after 1971, we have seen that how India went closer to Soviet Union. But in the present time, what we're witnessing is completely different. What India says in the official documents, and if you hear the speeches of External Affairs Minister Mr. Jaishankar, so and earlier Shashi Tharoor also, so they all are talking about multi-alignment, where India thinks that the world is very uncertain. US is a declining power. India thinks that China is emerging. Russia still remains an important military power. European Union is economically very, very important. Japan is economically important. So what India tries to do is that India claims that it would prefer to have a policy of multi-alignment rather than the earlier non-alignment, which means that India would engage with every country in the world, all the important countries in the world. And that's why you see that India is having a close cooperation, military as well as economic cooperation with the United States and with other countries like Japan, European Union, Russia also. And earlier, just before the conflict of this Ladakh with China, India signed in 2005 a strategic partnership with China also. So India wanted to have a good relationship with China also, and India became the member of BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So all of those were indicatives of India trying to pursue a different kind of foreign policy, which was a multi-alignment policy. The third important point in the grand strategy is about neighborhood. That there is a realization somewhere in India's foreign policy that we have ignored the neighborhood, the kind of focus, the kind of the connectivity, the kind of economic engagements that should have happened between India and the neighboring countries. That has not happened. So what we are seeing that there is a reawakening in India, where India is trying to reconnect with its neighbor, and there are 3-4 reasons why India is trying to reconnect and why there is an urgency in India's foreign policy to connect with the neighbors. One is, of course, the presence of China. Till 2005, China was not very, very powerful country in South Asian region in terms of economic engagement, in terms of military presence. China was not very that powerful. But after 2005, the dynamics changed in terms of economy, in terms of military, in terms of political engagement. China has become a very, very important power in the South Asian region, and that has started alarming India and India's foreign policy. And Second important factor why neighborhood first has become an important policy agenda of India is the growth in South Asia. South Asia is one of the fastest growing region in the world. All the countries in South Asia, including Pakistan, they are growing. Before Corona, this crisis, etc., they were growing with a good percentage of GDP. For instance, every country was growing like 6%, 6.5%. So that growth has invited a lot of interactions between South Asian countries and China, and South Asian countries and the Western countries. So that growth has attracted number of countries, including India. And third is the threat from neighborhood. India thinks that earlier Pakistan was the major threat, but after the presence of China and the issue of terrorism, which is has become very important in South Asian region. So because of that, India thinks that unless until you have a very good relationship, unless until you have some kind of control over the neighbors, the issue of terrorism cannot be tackled, because they are very amorphous and they are originating sometime from Bangladesh, sometime from Nepal. Terrorist attacks have taken place in Sri Lanka, Maldives, and sometimes that threat has originated. So we need to have a very good political and military relations with the South Asian neighbors. So these factors, China, growth, and the threat perception, all of that has geared India to have a very close cooperation with the South Asian neighbors. And there is a bipartisan consensus between Congress and BJP, that although there are some, there is a difference in terms of foreign policy, but on the issue of foreign policy, both of them agree that India has to have a very close cooperation with the neighbors. In 2011, when Manmohan Singh visited Bangladesh, so he said, in his statement, he said, India cannot realize its destiny without the neighbors. And similarly, Modi, a number of times, he has reiterated Sabka Saath, Sabka Vishwas, which means basically together we grow. And his policy of Actist, basically Actist was the Lookist policy converted into Actist, connecting with the Southeast Asian ASEAN countries, and Act Far East, etc. So all these policies are indicative of India's growing importance, or India realizing that we cannot grow unless and until we have a very good relationship with the South Asian countries. If I come to Modi's neighborhood policy, and he says neighborhood first policy, he did try to activate his connection with the South Asian neighbors. These are some of the examples that during his swearing-in ceremony of 2014, he invited all the leaders of SAARC, including Pakistan. But if you see, how there is a gradual shift in the next swearing-in ceremony in 2019, so some of the countries have been left out. He invited BIMSTEC countries, BIMSTEC leaders, in the next swearing-in ceremony in 2019, where Pakistan was not invited, Maldives was not invited, and Afghanistan was also not invited. So there's a gradual shift in India's understanding of neighborhood. India has somehow come to realize that it is impossible to resolve the issues with Pakistan. So let's create a regional grouping. Let's create a platform for interaction within the region through which it can develop projects or develop connectivity with the other countries, excluding Pakistan. So that's why you see the importance of BIMSTEC in the BBIN, etc. in South Asia. And Modi also visited all the countries in the region, which is again important. Although his visits are more symbolic, but what follows is very important, and it also shows the kind of importance that he gives to the neighbors. In many places he succeeded, and in many places he did not succeed, or India's foreign policy did not succeed. So he visited all the countries of South Asia, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bhutan, Pakistan, Myanmar. He in fact visited 4 times to Nepal. Yesterday only I checked, if you go to the PMO website, there is a list that how many times he has visited to number of countries and what cost he incurred during his visit. So that cost is given. So he visited 4 times to Nepal, including in one of the SAARC meetings, etc. But total 4 times to Nepal, 3 times to Sri Lanka, twice to Bhutan, twice to Maldives, once to Bangladesh, twice to Myanmar, twice to Afghanistan. So you can see that how he tried to activate by the bilateral visits, and similarly the leaders of other countries also visited India. So he did try to reactivate India's connection with the neighbors. Sabka Saath, Sabka Vishwas, as I told you, one of the problems in India's foreign policy is the emphasis on the cultural reconnection, all the cultural, the way we try to kind of recreate the past, civilizational reconnection that sometimes we argue, and that has created a real problem. And I'll talk about that, how that has created problem with Bangladesh, and that has also created problem with Pakistan, Sri Lanka, etc. So that was about Modi's neighborhood first policy. And now I'll explain you, I'll give you some of the brief outline of why South Asian regional integration through SAARC or through other mechanisms have not really succeeded. And one of the reasons for, there are a number of reasons that why this multilateralism, which India and South Asian countries, they try to create, they have not succeeded in creating a regional integration mechanism. South Asia is today one of the least integrated region in the world. South Asia is not very well connected, either in terms of institutions or in terms of physical infrastructure. And there are some reasons for it. But India did try to create SAARC. India, I mean, the proposal came from Bangladesh, supported by Nepal and other countries. SAARC was created in 1985, but even that time, India was suspicious of this creation of SAARC because India thought that these smaller countries of South Asia, they will gang up against India, and that that sense somehow continues. And India-Pakistan dispute has become the major reason why SAARC cannot succeed. And since 2016, after the Uri terrorist attack, India refused to participate in the SAARC meeting, which was supposed to take place in Islamabad. Recently, a symbolic meeting on the COVID issue took place. The online meeting took place between the leaders of SAARC countries, and India committed 10 million, but which is nothing. 10 million for COVID for the entire SAARC region, it is very symbolic. So basically, SAARC as an organization is not effective, is not working. So India tried to create the other organization. Frustrated with Pakistan, it set up the BIMSTEC in 1997, which is Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. It includes 5 countries of South Asia, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, and 2 countries we have borrowed from the Southeast Asia, which is Myanmar and Thailand. And as you know that we have borders with Myanmar, and there is no reason why Myanmar should not be in the part of broader regional integration of India and South Asia. Similarly, we are also trying to emphasize on the sub-regional grouping, which is BBIN, which is Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal initiative. And we're trying to, because it's easier to work with these countries, so we have started developing connections with the BBIN. And these are some of the reasons, if I briefly point you out, what are the reasons for regional integration not succeeding in South Asia? So first is the India's preeminence makes other countries, smaller countries, very suspicious. There is a huge asymmetry between India and its neighbor in terms of power, in terms of population, in terms of demography, in terms of economic GDP. So because of that, the smaller countries get very, very suspicious. And the big brother syndrome or the regional hegemon, that attitude is resented by India's neighbors. As you know that India's role in creation of Bangladesh, intervention in Sri Lanka, helping Sri Lanka in the elimination of LTTE just a few years back, relations with Bhutan, influence over Maldives, Nepal, etc. So that creates some kind of mistrust and suspicion. And these countries, which are very assertive in terms of their sovereignty, they fear that they will lose their identity and uniqueness if they get very close to India, either in terms of economy or in terms of culture. So that has created some kind of barrier in terms of political and psychological integration of the region. Second is, of course, the historical legacy, that how the partition the partition of 1947, where Pakistan separated. So that has created a barrier forever. And we have not been able to overcome that psychological and physical barrier. India's trade with either Iran or with Central Asia, that is physically blocked because of the presence of Pakistan. Pakistan will not allow any kind of trade to take place through the territory of Pakistan, either to Iran or to Central Asia. And that has, we are blocked. And we try to kind of hopscotch, or we try to kind of bypass that barrier when we try to create Chabahar in Iran. And that was, but Chabahar again has become an issue recently, and we'll talk about it later. So you can ask me in Q&A. First was the partition that created a kind of barrier. The socialist policy of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s that also created some kind of insular policy where we did not necessarily focus on the neighbors. Because the policy was to become self-dependent or independent. So the kind of connection that we should have created with the South Asian neighbor, so that was not created because of emphasis on a socialist model of development. Third was the Nehru's vision of top-down approach of being a global power. We wanted to become a global power. We wanted to become the leader of non-alignment movement and third world countries. But what we failed to understand is that you cannot become a superpower or the global power if you completely ignore the region. So those were some of the reasons in terms of history that why we got disconnected with our neighbors. Also, the security, the third factor, that we emphasize too much on security, and the trade and economic cooperation, those factors were ignored in South Asia. India, as any big power behaves, India prefers bilateralism over multilateralism. That we want to deal directly with, say, Sri Lanka, with Pakistan, or with Nepal, rather than dealing them through in a multilateral forum. The smaller countries and the countries which are weaker, so they always prefer multilateralism. But as you see that United States favors bilateralism with other countries. Similarly, India in the region also favors bilateralism over multilateralism. And that is suspected by the smaller neighbors in the country. And the final point, why integration has not succeeded, the fifth point is cultural nationalism. And that has augmented the mistrust and suspicion in the region. And the classic example of that suspicion is the CAA and the NRC that has created in Bangladesh and also Afghanistan, etc. So there is a limit to cultural diplomacy. There is a limit to recreation of the civilizational ties. And I'll show you, when the BJP, even BJP's national secretary, he wrote an article where he said that nations are uncomfortable with oneness and they urge for uniqueness. He was talking about the South Asian region, that how the India's attempt to create one unit with South Asia will not succeed, because other countries, they love their uniqueness. They want to and they emphasize their exceptionalism. They want to maintain their broader sovereignty, because they're very suspicious of their sovereignty getting lost under the influence of India. Even the diplomat I.P. Khosla, he also said that that recreation of past unity worries the neighbors, and he has worked in some of the South Asian countries as ambassador. So these are some of the reasons why the regional integration has not really succeeded in South Asia. This is the article that I was talking about, Ram Madhav's article. It was in Indian Express just a few days back. So as Chinese influence ambition expand in the region, Delhi must add PM's principle of together we grow to neighborhood first policy. Even BJP is realizing the limitness of civilizational and cultural linkages with other South Asian countries. Now I'm coming to the very specific issue of connectivity, because in 21st century, one thing which has become very, very important is the issue of connectivity, especially after China's Belt and Road Initiative or Maritime Silk Road, whatever you call it. So India has started to think in terms of connecting with the neighbors through actual physical connectivity, road, railway, water transport, etc. And let me tell you that it's very strange that we do not have any rail link between India and Nepal or India and Myanmar. we could have easily created rail connectivity. We always crib that China is creating rail connection in Tibet, that China is trying to create rail connectivity in Nepal. But what we fail to realize that somehow the kind of connectivity that we could have created, and that has not happened. India and Bangladesh had, in 1960s, there were 12 trains between India and Bangladesh, but by the mid 1980s, we had just one. So we lost with Bangladesh, and with most of the capitals in South Asia, for a very long time, we didn't have even the direct flight connectivity. So that shows a kind of apathy, and that shows a kind of disconnect that existed in India's neighborhood policy. But gradually, and also because most of the countries except Bhutan in South Asia, they have joined the BRI. So now India is realizing that if all of them become part of BRI, so India would be the loser, and India needs to reconnect with neighbors through alternative networks and alternative routes. India is trying to now develop some of the routes, some of the improvements in cross-border infrastructure, such as integrated checkposts, road, rail links, etc. That is being created now, and some steps have been taken to upgrade the infrastructure, like ICPs, as I told you, and also the rail networks now they are being established. For instance, Agartala and Akhauda railway link from Bangladesh, and the Rakshol and Nepal link railway link, and the border checkpost between India and Myanmar, that Jokhautar and Rikhaudar, and that has been created. Number of checkposts, in fact, have been created in all the neighboring countries where we have the trade and the trade and the movement of people. And briefly, I'll show you that how we are missing out in South Asia, also in terms of trade. Although South Asian countries, some of the South Asian countries are very, very important for India in terms of trade, especially Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. But China has made inroads, and China has become very powerful in terms of economic activity. I'll give you a brief just outline of that. I'll show you some of the figures through which you can actually see that how the trade is taking place. So India's actual trade in South Asia, that varies from $25 billion, which is just 3% of India's global trade of roughly $637 billion. So you can imagine, that only 3% we are trading with South Asia. Most of our trade is not with South Asia, but with other countries like Europe, America, China, and Southeast Asia. Trade with Pakistan is actually now, if I give you the figure of last year, it's in few hundred millions, not even billion. This is the previous figure. But according to the World Bank, the potential of India is having only 30% of its, using its 30% of its potential in terms of its trade with South Asia. And if India plays it well, the trade can increase very easily to $62 billion with the South Asian countries. And it can grow up till $37 billion with Pakistan. But given the intransigence and kind of rigidity that we see in the policies of Pakistan, it is very, very difficult at the moment to have good economic trade with Pakistan. India's largest export market in the region is Bangladesh, followed by Sri Lanka and Nepal, whereas the largest import of value come from Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. And remember one thing: in trade with Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, we export much more than they import to us. So we have a huge trade surplus. Unlike as we have the trade deficit with China, but with South Asian neighbor we have a huge trade surplus. With Bangladesh we have nearly 7.6 billion. With Nepal we have 6.8 billion, and we also have trade surplus with Sri Lanka. So all these countries are very, very important for us in terms of trade, in terms of trade surplus. We signed some of the agreements, but many of the agreements are not working. For instance, we signed SAARC preferential trading arrangement, SAFTA, which was signed in 1994. That was followed by SAFTA, which is free trade agreement. But the list of restrictions of the commodities are too many, and it is not really successful. And we gave the most favored nation status to Pakistan for a very long time, but that was not reciprocated by Pakistan. So that is not working. India signed with this free trade agreement with Sri Lanka in 1998, and after that the activities between the two countries have increased tremendously in terms of trade and also in terms of movement of people. Until 2005, India and China were very close in terms of their overall trade volume with South Asia. But this changed in 2014. By 2014, China trade reached a high of $60 billion with South Asian countries. Of course, India was also part of it. But the trade with India's trade with South Asia remained at only $24 billion, which is much less. And if I give you the exact figure, so this chart will show you that how India is trading with the neighbors and how there is a huge gap in terms of India's trade with the neighbors and China's trade with the neighbors, and how our neighbors has become much more closer to China in terms of economic engagement compared to India. So if you can see the figure here, India's trade with Bangladesh, and this is the figure of 2018. So India's trade with Bangladesh is only $9.82 billion, while China's trade with Bangladesh is $18.74 billion. Pakistan, of course, we are not trading, so I'm not giving you the figure. Sri Lanka, we have a trade of only $6.19 billion, while with Sri Lanka, China has touched almost like $5 billion. With Nepal also $1.1 billion, China has increased. And with Maldives, Bhutan is the only country where China has not made inroads, but in other countries, China has increased tremendously. Myanmar also, as you can see, India's trade with Myanmar is just $1.75 billion, while China's trade with Myanmar is 15.29. Like, we have borders with Myanmar, but, our trade is very, very low. Trade is very limited. And we have not done much in terms of connectivity or in terms of, trade with Myanmar. So there is a huge potential of increasing the trade with all these countries. But for that, we need investment. We need infrastructure connectivity, rail, road, waterways, etc. Otherwise, it may not work out very well for India in the neighborhood. Now, I know I'll briefly, because we are talking about India's neighborhood policy. So briefly, I'll give you the bilateral relation of an overview, and the details you can ask me in Q&A. But I'll give you an overview of how India's bilateral relationship is playing out with each country in the region. So Pakistan is irreconcilable because of terrorism, the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which passes through the Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So because of that, we did not join the PRI, and then we are very suspicious of Pakistan because of that. And of course, Jammu and Kashmir, and that is one of the factors. We can talk about in Q&A. I'm not getting into detail, but you can ask me later if you have any question related to that. Second, we lost one of the very important countries. Where did we go wrong in Nepal? PM Modi visited 4 times to Nepal, but recently you have been following the news, and you see that you might have heard that how Nepal raised the issue of Kali River, the Lipu Lake and Limpia Adhura. These are the territories in between India and Nepal in the Pithoragarh district of Himalaya, and Nepal claims that these are the territories which belong to Nepal. And Nepal passed this new map in the parliament just this year, where it claimed that all these territories belong to Nepal and not to India. This issue came when Rajnath Singh inaugurated the border road from Pithoragarh to Lipu Lake. So that was the time that this issue was raised by Nepal, but this is not a new issue, and Pakistan and Nepal has been raising this issue for the last 2-3 years. And with Nepal, one of the major flaws, one of the major obstacles that the reason we lost Nepal was one of the blockade that we created in 2015 when the new constitution was being adopted in Nepal. Then that time, we in support of Madhesis, we created an informal blockade. Although India did not create it officially, but we created informal blockade. After that, the Maoist parties, the Communist Party in Nepal, they started exploiting the anti-India sentiment in Nepal. And whether it's KP Sharma Oli or earlier Pushp Kamal Dahal Prachanda, all of them, they some kind of, spurred the anti-India sentiment during the election campaign in 2017 and later. And India about this issue of this Lipu Lake and Kali River origin, because the border in that region is decided by the Kali River. The problem is that Nepal says that the Kali River originates from the other place. India claims that it originates from other place. So that is the confusion about the border between India and Nepal in that Himalayan region. And India has been in this position of territory since 1950s. India signed a number of agreements with China, and India-China trade takes place through this Lipu Lake. Lipu Lake is very important for India because that is the shortest route for India to get access to Tibetan Plateau, and we have our army, camps in that Lipu Lake region. And Lipu Lake is also important because the people who go to Mansarovar for pilgrimage, they go through the Lipu Lake Pass. So that region is strategically very, very important. But Nepal claims that according to the 1815, the Sugauli Treaty, which took place between Nepal and British Empire, so on that basis and the origin of Kali River, so on that basis, Nepal claims that Lipu Lake that region belongs to Nepal and not to India. So that is the dispute, and unfortunately what has not happened. Recently, you might have heard that KP Sharma Oli, the Prime Minister of Nepal, he claimed that India is trying to change the regime. The army, Indian, and the chief of Indian Army made the statement that Nepal is doing it on behalf of China. So that kind of the war of words and acrimony started taking place, and we have not started the secretary level of dialogue of which Nepal is demanding. I think India and Nepal should sit down and start the dialogue so that this issue can be resolved or managed. So I'll move to the other points with Nepal. We do have some developmental projects with Nepal. We are creating the largest hydropower Arun 3 project in Sanku Wasaba with 6,000 crore cost. We also creating the Raxaul is in Bihar. So Raxaul Kathmandu rail line. We are also trying to develop inland water transport between with the Kalughat, the post in Bihar. Talks are also about Pancheshwar multipurpose dam projects. So what is happening is that we are trying to create some of the infrastructural projects in Nepal, and we wanted, because Nepal has a huge hydroelectric potential, and initially India was very interested in developing Nepal, and India wanted to create a grid which would connect Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. But somehow after India became a power surplus, and some of the projects which are being developed in Nepal, India may not be now interested in buying electricity from Nepal, and many of the projects are being developed with the help of China. So that is creating some kind of discontent in Nepal, that even if you have the hydropower projects, who will buy the electricity? So the is very limited for requirement of Nepal, so it has to sell to other countries. So that is the issue with Nepal. I'm coming to Bangladesh very briefly. Bangladesh, after coming of Sheikh Hasina, Bangladesh was favorably disposed with India. Modi visited once to Bangladesh, and we also signed deals for exchange of enclaves. 111 enclaves went to Bangladesh and 51 came to India. But there are 2-3 issues that has created some kind of the discontent or problems between the two countries. Bangladesh, the CAA and the NRC, and all of you from Assam, what it means to Bangladesh. So that has created a lot of discontent in Bangladesh. Hasina government tried to downplay this. Hasina government made the official statement when she said that NRC was an internal matter of that country. But the Islamist parties in Bangladesh and also the other parties, they are trying to create a sentiment against India. They're provoking the sentiment against India. So that is an issue between India and Bangladesh. There are some smaller issues like killing of Bangladeshi civilian on the border has increased. That's what they complain, that it was 41 in 2019. In the last 5 years, it was 158. A water sharing agreement. Tista, as you know, this deal was about to be signed in 2011, but it is still hanging because of the protest from the government of West Bengal. water is a state issue, and Mamata Banerjee, she refused to be the part of this agreement. So after that, we have not signed the Tista agreement with Bangladesh, while Bangladesh claims that it has allowed India to withdraw water from Feni River. Mamata says that you can take the water from the other river, but not from Tista, because North Bengal would face problem if we share Tista water. Bangladesh has enabled India to set up surveillance radar in the Bay of Bengal, and the Myanmar, this Rohingya issue also created some kind of problem in Bangladesh vis-a-vis India. And the use of terms by our politicians like termite, etc., that that was bitterly opposed by the newspaper writings and some of the intellectuals in Bangladesh. India should have avoided, because we have a very good relation with Bangladesh. We have good trade with Bangladesh, and we have trade surplus with Bangladesh. So those kind of terms should have been avoided. And now briefly, some of the issues with Maldives and Sri Lanka. Maldives and Sri Lanka are very, very important, because when this China is trying to develop ports, Hambantota port in Maldives, it is also developing port in Myanmar and in Maldives, etc. So Pakistan already Godar. So at one point of time, it appeared that when this Sri Lanka was ruled by the Rajpakshas earlier. So that time, it appeared that we have lost Maldives and Sri Lanka. Abdullah Yameen was very anti-India. Similarly, the Sri Lankan, this Rajpaksa in the previous term, not this term, but the previous term, Rajpaksa was, he signed an agreement with China, and against the protest of India. So that created some kind of disagreement with India. But now, the new regime in Sri Lanka and Maldives, that has created some kind of positive attitude towards India. Modi visited, when he became the prime minister second time, his first visit was in Sri Lanka and Maldives. So that shows the kind of importance India started giving to these two countries. India Maldives relations were almost broken during President Abdullah Yameen, but solely invited India to intervene. At one point of time, when it was an issue of Yameen versus Soli in Maldives, so India was thinking that whether India should intervene in Maldives or not. Normally, our policy is not to intervene after the IKLF intervention in Sri Lanka, but there is a new kind of this policy was being discussed in New Delhi, where people are thinking in terms of intervening in Maldives also. So Maldives is very important for India in the Indian Ocean region, where Seychelles, Mauritius, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. These are the four important regions in the Indian Ocean, which are the where we have a very good connection now. And now the politics has also changed in favor of India. India has invested in Maldives 1,800 million credit. India is also proposing with Japan to develop in Sri Lanka East Container Terminal at Colombo Port, and this would be very close to the international Hambantota port, which is being developed by China. So India is trying to make Maldives and Sri Lanka as a part of broader Indo-Pacific strategy. And in the Indo-Pacific strategy, India is cooperating closely with the United States, Japan, and Australia. You have this quadrilateral alliance. You also have this Malabar exercises. So in the broader Indo-Pacific strategy, India would like these smaller countries, smaller neighbors, to be part of that broader strategy. Modi's visit to this Maldives emphasized the Sagar. Sagar is security and growth for all in the region, and to integrate this with the Indo-Pacific strategy of India. Afghanistan, in Afghanistan, we have the policy of not talking with Taliban, because we do not differentiate between good Taliban and bad Taliban, while all other countries have started talking with the Taliban. You know that United States, which actually attacked Taliban, now is in talk with Taliban. The Russia is a part of it. China is part of it. Number of other countries are part of it. So somehow, we need to, because Afghanistan is a very important country for security reasons, and also now investment and aid. India has given the maximum aid to Afghanistan, and India has invested nearly $2.5 billion in Afghanistan. The reason we wanted to develop the Chabahar port in Iran, partly because the first reason was that we wanted a land connectivity with Afghanistan, and we thought that we can ship our products from Mumbai or Kandla port to Chabahar, and from there through road or railway networks to Afghanistan. But recently, you might have heard that Iran cancelled the rail project, with India, and that created a lot of furor and a lot of this anger in India. But anyway, we can discuss that later. So India has in Afghanistan is very, very important, and India is training a lot of people from Afghanistan, whether it's bureaucracy, army, military, etc. So India is very active in Afghanistan, and for Central Asian region and for Pakistan. You have to have a foothold in Afghanistan so that we can have this foothold in Afghanistan. Bhutan, we have a very cordial relation. In fact, one country with which we have the closest relation at the moment, so that is Bhutan. As you know that in Doklam was an issue between Bhutan and China, but India took a very firm position that India will support Bhutan on the issue of Doklam, and it was Bhutan is the only country which is not the part of Belt and Road Initiative of China. So Bhutan is very, very close to India. Now, very briefly, I'll give you just in 1 minute. I'll give you the cultural diplomacy limitations of cultural diplomacy, and then I'll come to conclusion. So give me 4 or 5 minutes, and I'll be done. So cultural nationalism may not serve India well in the region. Nepal was the only other contestant of Hindu nationalism. But now recently you might have heard that Nepal is claiming that the birthplace of Lord Rama is in Nepal and not in India. Sri Lanka is divided between Buddhist and Hindu Tamils. Maldives is Islamic, Pakistan is Islamic, Bhutan is Buddhist, Afghanistan is Islamic. So the cultural diplomacy of India, which is based on majoritarian kind of this religion, so that is contested in the neighborhood. Many of the countries in the neighborhood, they do not like India to have this cultural based or diplomacy framed or couched in terms of culture or civilization. Abrogation of Article 370 has impacted India's relation with Pakistan and China, and Pakistan is trying to spur and provoke the Islamic sentiment in Bangladesh and also in Jammu and Kashmir. Bangladesh and Afghanistan were very unhappy with the CAA, the Citizen Amendment Act that we brought. So Bangladesh and Afghanistan, one of the reasons why they were not happy, because these two countries were clubbed with Pakistan, and Bangladesh claims itself to be a secular country, and Bangladesh was not happy that it was treated in the same category as Pakistan. And that how the CAA, they feared that how this the return of the migrant or immigrants from India would create a huge refugee problem in Bangladesh. So Ram Madhav, as I told you, that he also said that nations are not compatible with oneness. They would like to pursue that uniqueness. Cultural vision of India is problematic because most of the countries, they are either Buddhist or Islamic, or they're divided in terms of Nepal is a Hindu country, but Nepal is also ruled by a Maoist or the Communist Party. So there is also ideological clash between these two cultures. So the cultural nationalism has its limitation, and what one should not do, that culture should be left to the people. We should try to encourage people-to-people interaction. Culture is not something which should be imposed by the state. The moment a state tries to promote this culture or the soft power diplomacy, that creates the problem. Confucianism is being promoted by China, and that is being resisted by many countries in the world. Similarly, if the state tries to promote this culture and cultural diplomacy, so that would be resisted by many of the countries in the world. But if it happens through people-to-people interaction, if there is a huge cultural interaction between, say, India and Nepal, or the India and Sri Lanka, so there is absolutely no problem, and our relationship will become stronger. But when a state tries to do it, then people or the neighbors get suspicious. Now the final remarks, with that I'll conclude. Now the question that might be there in your mind, that how will India displace China, which is now a resident power in South Asia? So Beijing's influence, as I told you, is growing in its backyard, India's backyard, and it has rattled India. That India is very nervous, and about the China's presence, the optic fiber connectivity, hydro projects, the railway, road networks, that airports that China is creating in Nepal. So that has created a lot of resentment in India. The 1999-year lease of Sri Lanka's Hambantota port to China, because China could not repay the debt. So China leased for 99 years. So Sri Lanka leased that port of Hambantota to China for 99 years because it could not repay the debt. So that has created a kind of fear in the Indian for India, because India thinks that China might use that port for security purposes. The dual purpose of that port could be harmful for India. And as I told you, that India with Japan is also trying to develop another port very close to Hambantota in Sri Lanka. The investment has increased in Bangladesh, Chinese investment, the shareholding in Dhaka Exchange, etc. The trade has increased. They're also helping port, etc. So that has created a kind of fear in the Indian mind. India's response to that varies from inaction, that just wait for Chinese investment to fizzle out, Chinese project to fizzle out, or framing that discourse into security threat. So if China is investing in the region, the regions are looking for investment. Bangladesh is looking for investment. It's a poor country. Nepal is looking for investment. And they are getting the easiest money without any condition from China. So it will be very difficult for India to restrict these countries from getting the investment. But what India can do, but that India should allow China to invest in these regions, because if these regions develop, that would also be beneficial for India. But India should also try to enhance its own connectivity, its own investment. And China can invest in the big projects, big infrastructure project, while India can focus on people-oriented capacity building, sustainable development, agricultural partnership, disaster management. We can increase the cross-border connectivity and democratic partnership. Please remember that one thing that China does not like is the democracy. So if we have a very strong democracy in these countries, so that would be very helpful for India in the future. And India can also partner with Japan, United States, EU in the region, and it can develop the connectivity projects, because India does not have the deep pocket like China. So India can cooperate with Japan, United States, and EU to develop connectivity projects in India's neighborhood, which is South Asia, and also with Southeast Asia, Africa, Central Asia, etc. So that is one of the ways that India can bypass the fear of China. What needs to be done in terms of final remark? Neighborhood, we need faster connectivity with South Asia. We need to encourage people to people and cultural connection through non-state actor. Non-state is the crucial thing. If we do through a state, so the neighbors get suspicious. So we have to encourage the people to people and cultural connection through non-state actors. We have to build our relationship with extended neighbors, whether this is the foothold in Iran or in Central Asia or in ASEAN countries. So we have to, have a good relation with ASEAN countries. Recently, we were supposed to sign the RCEP, which is a regional, comprehensive economic partnership. But because China was a part of it, so we decided not to sign, to protect our own industries and protect our small scale sector in India. We have also now signed free trade agreement, etc., with the ASEAN. So that has kind of created some kind of a gap or the barrier between India's connection with the ASEAN. With Central Asia, we are not connected because Pakistan comes in between, and our port project in Chabahar, if we develop, so we can connect with Afghanistan, and another route we can also connect to Central Asia. So that Chabahar port becomes very, very important. And with Chabahar port, we're also planning to connect with the North-South transport corridor, which can take Indian product from Mumbai or Gujarat to Astrakhan in Russia, and also to European countries. So so we need to, the three suggestions that I'm giving here, one is with the neighborhood, where we need faster connectivity. With extended neighborhood, we need to have some military and also some very intensified trade connections. With great power, we need to develop strong relation with the United States. That is a reality now, and we cannot avoid it given the kind of belligerence that we see from China. So India is going to get closer to United States, but at the same time, India would maintain a good relationship with Russia. We know that Russia has a good relationship with China, but even then we understand the complications which will emerge if Russia is not in the side of India. If Russia, Pakistan, and China, that becomes an alliance, so that would be a nightmare for India. So India fortunately realizes that kind of situation, and also because of the army, the dependence of our defense purchases from Russia, India is likely to continue a very strong relationship with Russia in the next 10 years. And this also leads to some kind of we try to contain China through Russia also, and Russia plays a good role in resolving some of the conflicts between India and China, as it did in Doklam and also recently. With Japan, Japan is very keen on supporting India, and India decided on this India-Africa corridor, which Japan is supposedly likely to be a part of it. So we need to bring in Japan also in the region, so that we can overcome the dilemma that we are facing in terms of increasing presence of China in South Asia. And we also need to have a very long-term vision. The problem with the democracy in India is that we are not certain that who is going to rule after 5 years. So you'll always see that China is signing 25 years agreement with Iran. China has signed 40 years agreement with Russia, Turkmenistan, Bangladesh, etc. But that kind of long-term vision is missing in India's policy. At the best, we sign deal for 5 years, 3 years. So we need to sign a long-term deals. We started doing that in Chabahar. We did that. We had a long-term deal on the issue of Chabahar, but Chabahar investment is just less than $1 billion. So we need to have much more active presence in India's the South Asian regions, and also in the extended neighborhood. Only then we can save ourselves from the broader increasing presence of China in South Asia. So with that, I think I'll conclude my presentation here, and I'll be happy for this Q&A which might come in. So I think thank you so much for hearing me out, and I hope that I made some sense on this issue. So I'll stop it here. And Gautam ji, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for hearing me out. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's really a very engaging and insightful lecture. You have highlighted the various issues and dynamics related to India's foreign policy regarding its neighboring countries. Now I would like to request Professor Sudarshan Roy, former head, Department of Political Science, to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Padita Mukherjee. Over to you, sir. Sudarshan Roy, sir.
Hello, am I audible? Hello.
Yes, yes, yes.
So thank you, Professor Ranjan Kumar, sir. So let's move to our next part of this webinar. So I feel honored to introduce for you our next speaker, Dr. Padita Mukherjee, former visiting professor, State University of New York, USA. Dr. Mukherjee is an independent scholar who holds a PhD in International Relations from the University of Maryland, Collegeport. His dissertation research explores the domestic political impact of interstate wars on countries that face them. He has previously worked at the State University of New York, Geneseo, where he taught courses on U.S. foreign policy, developing world politics, and international politics. Dr. Mukherjee's current research interests are India's relations with the U.S. and China, global governance, and global value chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sudarshan Roy. Now I request Dr. Padita Mukherjee to deliver his lecture. Please, sir, over to you, sir.
Good morning. Let me just set up my PowerPoint. Can you see it now?
Sir, it's coming.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor for me to join all of you at BN College. It's one of my first few webinars that I'm doing while in India. So it has been a very engaging session so far with Professor Ranjan Kumar talking about for India's policy in the neighborhood. So I'll be building on some of the themes that he has already spoken about, but I'll be focusing more on India's relationship with the US. But I'll start off with talking about the US-China bilateral relationships and its present status. So the question that I am basically addressing in this particular presentation is that will the current deterioration of Indo-China ties, will it motivate the Indian government to join a US-led alliance or coalition of the willing? So, so in Professor Ranjan Kumar's presentation, as well as in general elite opinion in India, we often find this presumption that the natural course of action for India's foreign policy to take, given the incident at Galwan and the belligerence that we see from China, is to align more closely with the US. So this has been a very common theme, and so I'd like to explore this question through this presentation. So these are the few points that I'm going to cover in today's presentation. I'll start off with talking about the current state of US-China relationship. Then I'll talk about the US stance on India-China and India-Russia relation. Then the US-India defense cooperation, and then trade relations between the two countries. And finally, I'll end with some of the downsides of closer alignment of India with the US. So currently the international order is facing the consequences of the deterioration of US-China relations over the past few years, especially since President Trump was elected in early 2016, in 2016, and came to power in 2017. So there is a lot of writing and commentary going on right now, which says that an anti-China coalition of democracies can be formed, in which India should participate. So we have concepts like the Quad and so on. So for this to pan out, we have to then go back and look at US domestic politics a little bit. So right now, what we have to assess is whether the current downward trend in US-China relations is due to structural reasons, or does it have some domestic political factors also? The clearest indication that US-China relations were on a downward trajectory came in 2017 when the Trump administration released its national security strategy, and where China was declared as a strategic competitor. So within China, there is still a perception amongst its elites, among its policymakers, that most of what the US has been doing has been for domestic consumption, because Trump is a sui generis or a unique phenomenon in American politics, and he is basically playing up to his nativist base, where xenophobia and nativism and protectionism are very popular. So he's targeting China, and most of the policies that follow are rooted in a single individual or his domestic constituencies. So there is some truth to this argument, and I subscribe to this perspective that while from a distance, it might seem that US-China relations are on a completely irreversible trend. The extent of complex interdependence that US and China have engaged in over the past 3 decades or 3.5 decades will make it very difficult for any administration to completely quote unquote decouple from China. So you might find, so I am saying this despite the fact that you find that even the President Trump's rival in the presidential race, Joe Biden of the Democratic Party, he is also making anti-China noises. So, but my perspective is that if President Biden is elected, if Mr. Biden is elected in November, then we will see, we are more likely to see some sort of a rapprochement or attempts towards rapprochement, unless something happens between now and November that makes it completely irreversible. Certain escalations happen between the two countries which make it completely irreversible. So what are the main indicators which people cite for the current deterioration of US-China relations? So you have the Trump administration announcing sanctions on senior Chinese officials, including members of the ruling Politburo, over the mass internment of Muslims. And then you have the revocations of the status of Hong Kong in diplomatic and trade relations by the US. And then the China's maritime claims in South China Sea has been declared as illegal. Now, certain observers point to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's recent speech, where he hearkened back to the kind of rhetoric which American policymakers used to use against the Soviet Union during the Cold War, where you had a lot of reference to communism, where there was a talk of irreconcilability of a communist system with the capitalist system and so on. Now, while rhetorically it might sound very nice, and it might recall or it might raise the specter of a danger of a Cold War, the China of today, it cannot be classified as a purely as a communist state by any stretch of imagination. It is deeply integrated into global capitalism in a variety of ways. Its economy is very is dependent on its integration with the global economy, and the economic model it is following, and it is going to follow in the near future, does not resemble communism in any sense. So so why I'm raising this, and now the other issue that people observers are saying is that there might be a US-China breakdown because of what is known as tech competition, especially in our 5G technology. As to now you are finding that both the Western bloc of countries are trying to exclude Huawei, and it is trying to exclude Chinese control over 5G technology. That is going to be the next big thing in information technology and telecommunications, and there might be some rupture in that sector. So, but that has not, although some beginnings have occurred, that has not occurred as yet. So that is too far into the future. So we can't really predict as to how that is going to pan out. So it is quite likely. So the reason I'm saying all this is that India should not act on the presumption that US-China hostility of today will be a permanent state of affairs. India should practice a hedging strategy where it should mentally be prepared that if Mr. Biden is elected, or even if Mr. Trump is re-elected, and it is in US interest to have to strike a deal with China, it might very well do so. So despite all that has happened, even the most hawkish of US policymakers and commentators use the word constraining rather than containment, which is what the word they used to use during the Cold War for the Soviet Union. Besides, the other reason why I am sanguine about future course of US-China relations is because tycoons and business executives who exercise enormous power on both parties in the US, both the Republicans and Democrats, they have very deep sunk costs in China. And so it is unlikely that they will go down without a fight. So throughout the Trump administration, despite the kind of commitment that President Trump has shown towards taking on China, he has faced enormous amount of pushback from important constituencies that support him, including his donor base. So there will emerge a constituency within the US that will call for a rapprochement or some sort of a deal or some sort of an agreement with China, so that the current course of deteriorating relations does not continue on the present course. So India has been very encouraged by the encouraging voices that have come from the US administration after Galwan, because unlike previous border skirmishes of the similar nature, this time US has not been very equivocal. It has been very unequivocal in terms of supporting India's position. So it has condemned China and supported India. That has again led to some sort of encouraging optimism in Indian commentariat and some policy making circles that US perception towards alignment with China has shifted, and US finds India to be a much more valuable partner than previously thought. So you have important functionaries like Alice Wells, who was in charge of the State Department South Asia Division, as well as Eliot Engel, who is the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee in the House of Representatives, coming out and using very strong language to condemn China and supporting India. For example, Eliot Engel said that China is demonstrating once again that it is willing to bully its neighbors rather than resolve conflicts according to international law. Unfortunately, particularly after President Trump's stay in office, who has gone out of his way to egregiously violate many of US commitments under international law, and he has shown a complete disregard for US involvement in many international institutions. This kind of rhetoric coming from the US functionaries does not have as much sway as it used to and under earlier administration, because US has completely abandoned what is known as the quote unquote democracy agenda or the liberal agenda under the Trump administration. So India should not hang its hat or align with the US thinking that it will become part of some sort of a liberal international project in which US and India will become co-equal partners on some normative basis. Now, if India-US relations are going to improve, or they will become, India and US have to become aligned with one another, then India has to recognize that its expectations of its self-image as a country, and what it expects out of a relationship with the US will have to change. because US is far too powerful, and the way it views middle powers allies like India is very different from the way Indians perceive themselves to be. So I'll come back to this point a little later. So, because this is not the first time where there was a huge expectation that India and US are coming together into some sort of a strong bilateral partnership. But every time this misperception on both sides has been very difficult to bridge. So, in fact, if we go back to in the early days of the Indian Republic, there was an offer from the US side to actually support India's transition from into democracy through some sort of a Marshall Plan, like the way the US was conducting in Europe. And the main strategic reason why US was trying to do that, was trying to offer that resistance, was the fear that of a rising China, of a red China, where the PLA had come to power in 1949. So, but then of course we all know the history that Pakistan won that bidding war in the sense, and Pakistan offered much more of an alignment, and which was much more amenable in comparison to India. So, and India thought it in its best interest to have a non-aligned posture and have a closer relationship with the Soviet Union in comparison to the US. Now, the reason why I'm talking about a rapprochement is because we must remember that in the middle of the Cold War, US opened up its relationship with China in 1971 due to purely realist strategic reasons. So the US policymakers under certain administrations, so there is a strong streak of idealism, but there is also a strong streak of realism in US foreign policy. So particularly when they deal with fellow great powers like the Soviet Union and China. So China under Kissinger opened up to that country, despite having a very contentious relationship throughout the Cold War, because they wanted to take on the Soviet Union, because they wanted to create a Sino-Soviet split. So India has to be careful in aligning with the US, because when the cost of its hostility with China will become far too much to bear, then it might have a deal with China, and that is particularly the case given the sunk cost that I spoke about earlier. Now, so that is my take on the US-China relations as of now. Now, there is a lot of discussion as far as India-US relations is concerned as to the increasing defense cooperation. So President Trump was here in India in February, and there was a lot of fanfare in terms of new defense production agreements and planes and surveillance equipment that India had purchased. But US would, as long as India has the kind of close ties with Russia, especially in the defense sector, US is unlikely to go beyond a certain point in terms of engaging in the defense, have a defense cooperation agreement with India, because US-Russia relationship, as we all know, is highly contentious, and it is unlikely to, and given India's dependence on Russia, where almost 60 to 70% of India's mechanized equipment comes from Russia, and those are what are known as legacy. It has a very strong legacy requirement where maintenance and so on are going to be a persistent part of the India-Russia relationship. So, so there is a lot of legacy hardware with Russia in the India's defense sector. So there is a continued relationship due to maintenance requirements which India will continue to have in the foreseeable future. So although the US recognizes that it is impractical for them to expect India to shift away from its defense relations with Russia, this will continue to present a huge obstacle in Indo-US alignment were it to be attempted. So India will have to make a choice, or it will have to deal with making Russia upset and that balancing will be very difficult to achieve, in my perspective. Now, US might be able to help India in boosting India's bilateral ties with US's East Asian allies, such as Japan and Indonesia. And if India chooses to expand its naval presence in the South China Sea, now that is again a very big if, because that will again require a tremendous amount of resource commitment. So right now, India's naval presence is limited to the Indian Ocean. The naval exercises that have occurred between joint naval exercises that have occurred between India and the US have been limited to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and the joint patrolling of the US has limited to the US Navy's Indo-Pacific Command. Now, in order to expand that and to join the US in countering China in the South China Sea will require an enormous shift in India's strategic doctrine, India's naval strategic doctrine. So again, so that is not going to be easy. And again, the problem of interoperability, which we often talk about, will continue to present a problem. So India has conducted joint naval exercises with the US in the Andaman Nicobar, and in the USS Nimitz, which is the aircraft carrier. And but still, compared to the US's traditional allies like Japan, the number of this is just a start. In order for us to become aligned with the US to that extent, to the extent of US's other Southeast Asian allies, India will have to accept a much more subordinate role, which having my
I can't hear. Hello? Yeah. Mute. Bappaditya, you have to unmute. Padita Mukherjee, you have muted your...
Hello, sir. You have muted. Yes, sir. Yeah, now it's okay, sir.
Okay. Yeah, now it's fine.
All right. So, so I was saying that although U.S. arms exports to India have
Bappaditya, again you have muted. Unmute Bappaditya Mukherjee.
Yeah, I did that. I don't know why.
It's muted. It shows muted even now.
But on my side, it is saying it's unmuted.
Okay, sir. It's fine now, sir.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, can you see the slide?
Yes, hello? Sir. We can see the slide, sir.
Okay. So yeah, so U.S.-India defense cooperation has increased. I'm not saying that it has not increased exponentially. As you can see, there is a it has increased. I mean, particularly 2008, the Indo-US civil nuclear deal was a major landmark, and from that point on, there has been an exponential increase in U.S. arms exports to India. But in terms of, but India's, as long, but balancing simultaneously with having the kind of asymmetrical dependence India has with Russia would continue to pose a huge obstacle. That is my point that I'm trying to make here. So now, so what about commercial ties? Now, again, you have so again it would seem that particularly given the kind of elite connections that exist between US and India, you would expect the level of bilateral, the volume of bilateral trade to be very high. But the reality is that although India ranks 8th amongst US trade partners, the share of the total trade volume of the US in India, India's total trade volume in the US is approximately 2%. So China, by comparison, is at 12%. So, and there are a whole host of issues that prevent or that are precluding US and China from trading at the level that that would be beneficial for both countries. So, and again, from a US standpoint, this will be a major problem. This will be another apart from, I talked about the defense issues that exist, where US is unlikely to be very trusting of India, of sharing technology with India, as long as India has the kind of defense partnership with the Russia that it does. Now, and the trade issue also, there are a whole host of sectors in which, due to domestic pressures on both sides, India and US are unable to open up market or give each other market access. So now you have the so recently, like, Trump is an economic nationalist. We all know that. So 2019 was a particularly bad year where India was taken out of the list of generalized state system of preferences, which give concessions to certain countries when they are classified as developing countries in the by the US. Now, having taken India out of that list meant that Indian goods coming into the US would be would face additional duties and tariffs. Now, that led to India also imposing retaliatory tariffs on a variety of goods that India imports from the US. Now, this kind of so we have a lot of issues in terms of our trade relationship. As an example, particularly India's imports from the US in the dairy sector has been very badly affected because India's insistence that no animal fat should be used in the production of milk, which US milk producers are unwilling to accept. So market access issues between US and China are very, very problematic right now, and so India has so just saying that India should align with the US to take on China. Well, it sounds very nice, and logically, India and US seem very natural allies because both are democracies. There is especially at the elite level, there is a lot of connections and so on. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, when it comes down to actual issues on which two nations come together, there are certain seemingly irreconcilable issues which prevent both countries from actually forming an alignment. So, and my perspective is that just as a balancer of China, US is unlikely to take the kind of risks in giving concessions to India in the under the current scenario. Now, but India has achieved important breakthroughs in its relationship with the US, particularly on the issue of Pakistan. India abrogated Article 370. So although there was some noise that was raised in the US and in the civil society in the US on that issue, but overall, the US government sided with India, or at least stayed neutral. And on issue after issue, US position in the global forum on the Pakistan question, on various issues where Pakistan issue is concerned, US has sided with India. So there might be certain expectation from the US side that India would help the US to extricate to ease its withdrawal from Afghanistan. But again, India is very reluctant to put actual boots on the ground and actually get physically involved, send troops into Afghanistan to support the implementation of the peace deal with the Taliban. Now, so that is again what I'm getting at, that US, when it talks about alignment, it has been used to very subordinate allies. So in India's grand strategy, that kind of subordination might not be acceptable. So if India wants to align with the US in order to counterbalance China, then it has to accept some sort of a subordinate status in its bilateral relationship, and get involved with the in places where it normally would like to avoid, say for example Afghanistan. So there are costs to aligning with the US, which in the current euphoric commentary that I'm reading and observing in the Indian commentariat today, we might be overlooking. Fortunately, from my point of view, given the position that I hold, it seems like the Indian policymakers continue to be very cautious as far as aligning with the US or aligning with the Quad or the Western democracies and Australia and joining that entire coalition against China. And I think that is the correct strategy. So because, as I mentioned earlier, India has to be ready for US-China rapprochement at some stage in the future, because both of them are US is a hegemonic power. China might be aspiring to hegemonic power status, but unlike previous eras in world history, this time superpower competition will not be resolved through a shooting war like the world wars of earlier, or the wars that preceded the concert of Europe in the 18th century. This time, resolutions, these two countries will come to some sort of arrangement at some stage. And it should not be the case that India is left out in the wind, in the whirlwind, because when it comes to US national interest, it is not going to care whether India's relationship with China has been, whether it is coming to India's aid vis-a-vis China, as far as China is concerned. Because Trump has made it very clear that the current course of US foreign policy is transactional. It believes in transactional, that is cost-benefit analysis. How much can my bilateral partner give to me, and what can I give to it in return? And it is US is driving a very hard bargain with its even its most traditional allies, including its NATO allies as well as its allies in East Asia. So, so for India to expect that US is going to give concessions on Indian terms to just because India is strategically placed to counter China may be overly optimistic. The other problem with the with actually aligning with the US is that India over the past decade has become commercially very dependent on China. So in the post-COVID, after the COVID pandemic, all countries, including the US, will face enormous resource constraints. Economies across the world will be in scarcity mode. So when we talk about these ambitious projects of aligning with the US in the South China Sea and US trying to counter China, one has to remember that what is happening in the US, the amount of economic devastation that the COVID pandemic has caused in the US is unprecedented, and the same holds true for India. So both these countries will be under enormous resource constraints to actually commit or divert resources from their domestic needs for strategic objectives of actually boosting their naval presence in South China Sea and so on. So that is why you see so much pressure on Trump to actually set a withdrawal date from Afghanistan, because it is very obvious that in the American domestic public opinion, the sense of fatigue with America's global presence is very severe. So that is why Trump's transactionalism with his allies is generally very popular across the board on a bipartisan level. Otherwise, it would have been unthinkable for any US president to actually blast his NATO allies the way he does on a regular basis, and that also includes his East Asian allies. So US is currently in a phase of imperial overstretch. That is a concept where the resources that are available for the US for its global commitments are diminishing by the day, because US domestic economy is in a tailspin, and unless some miracle happens and US is able to come up with a vaccine by the end of the year and there is an economic turnaround, US economy is going to be in a severe dislocation, in a state of severe dislocation in the coming decade. So one has to be careful. So while in the consensus in India right now is moving towards aligning with the US, India has to be aware of these realities. So and India must come back to the negotiating table with China, because and try to find some sort of resolution to the crisis, and if and at least give the negotiating process complete space, so that we completely become convinced that China is actually has adopted its aggressive foreign policy to the point of no return. So, but the point of taking that decision has not arrived yet, in my opinion. And if India is actually in a state of permanent hostility or in a state of severe hostility with China, then India should not rely on the US to come to its aid, because of the reasons that I have outlined in my presentation today. So I think with that, I'll end my presentation. So, so that is all I have to say in terms of US-China prospects of US-India alignment as to counter China.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your engaging lecture highlighting the various issues and dynamics of India's relationship with China and US. Now we will move to the Q&A session. Already we have got some questions. Sir, Rajan sir, should I read the question?
Yeah, no, you don't have to read. I can see the questions, so I'll read it out and answer the questions. Is that okay? All right. The first one is about the sharing of the PPT. So Tapan Kalita Sahab, I'll share the PPT with all the participants. So those of you who missed it, so you can get it. So that's okay. I'll give it to Gautamji and you can share with the participants.
Okay.
All right.
That's
yeah.
fine.
Second question is from Anshuman Bora, and he is asking about string of pearls. That how China is trying to create a string of pearls, and how that can affect India, and what should be the response of India through Chabahar and all. So thank you so much, Anshuman. That's a very important question. Although I do not necessarily agree with the term a string of pearls, because that is a kind of Pentagon term which is used by many of the security experts in India, and they think that China is trying to create a string of pearls. There is absolutely no doubt that China would not like India to become a very powerful country in the region, because because of economic reason, because of security reasons, because of India's expected collaboration with the United States in the future, and the kind of problems that it might create in the region. So what should India do? India has to build its own alliances. India has to create its own network, and India is already doing that. Let me tell you that the Quad that India cooperates with Australia, Japan, and United States, that informal political forum, and they also talk of some kind of this coalition of democracy. So that is a kind of political forum. And G7, in the G7, Trump has invited India. So India was already part of G20, but now Trump is saying that India should be included in the G8 or G9 or G11, whatever you call it. Korea, etc., South Korea and other countries should also be included. So the political dialogue is already taking place where US would like India to be on the side. But as Professor Padita Mukherjee rightly pointed out, you cannot completely rely upon United States if you want to counterbalance China. You have to have your own strategy in the region, which means connecting with your neighbors, investing in the neighbors. We completely missed out in Iran, for example. Chabahar port, we had such excellent relationship with Iran, but because of the US policy of sanction, we stopped importing oil from Iran. Chabahar now rail network is now that has been cancelled. In Chabahar port, we are still there. But the kind of goodwill that we have created in the region, sometimes they do not converse with the interest of the US, and that creates a problem. So India has to create its own network for countering China with democracy, with Vietnam, with Japan, with of course United States and also Russia, because Russia plays. If you have a good relation with Russia, the support of China also comes from Russia. So if Russia and United States, they are with you, China will think twice before going in a war with India. So Russia plays a very important role in terms of the giving the kind of confidence that China has. So this next question is from this Ujjwal Das. This question is Nepal's demand over territory. Nepal as a So recently, what has happened that Nepal has also got very confident, and the kind of politics that has emerged in Nepal, partly because of as I told you, that after the blockade, India created a blockade that energy supply was completely disrupted in Nepal in 2015 after the constitution issue. So anti-India sentiment has become very, very strong in Nepal, and that has been exploited by two factions. In the ruling party of Nepal, the Communist Party of Nepal today, there are two factions, as you know. One faction is the KP Sharma Oli, who is the Prime Minister, and the second faction is the Hulk Prachanda. And Prachanda controls the party, and PM Oli controls the government. So now they are conflicting. Now Prachanda wants to become the Prime Minister, and KP Sharma Oli made the statement that India is trying to topple the government in Nepal. So that has created a lot of rancor in India, and that is the reason why India has not initiated any dialogue with Nepal as yet. But of course, India treats Nepal as a buffer state, but now that buffer is being disrupted because China has overwhelming presence in Nepal. Now China is negotiating between the two factions of Nepal, the Prachanda and KP Sharma Oli. So China, the China is playing a very active role in politics also, apart from economics, etc. So India has to rebuild its political relationship as well as strategic relationship with Nepal to counterbalance China in the region. Next question is from Mufidur Rahman. How will Atmanirbhar Bharat impact the foreign policy of India? Remember, the concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat actually was given by Modi targeting China. It was primarily targeting China, not other countries, because we have a lot of trade deficit with China, nearly $55 billion of trade deficit we have with China. So Atmanirbhar Bharat is actually geared against China, not against other countries. For instance, if you start talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat with Bangladesh, you have a trade surplus of nearly $7 billion with Bangladesh. This is in your favor. India gains much more with Bangladesh than Bangladesh gains from the trade with India. So you would not like to have Atmanirbhar Bangladesh, Atmanirbhar Pakistan, Atmanirbhar Sri Lanka. If everybody becomes Atmanirbhar, every country would be a loser. So Atmanirbhar concept of India was actually geared against China because we had huge trade surplus, trade deficit with China, and of course we had conflict with China. So because of that, we started talking of Atmanirbhar Bharat, where we can substitute the imports that we are doing from China. So that was the reason why we talked about Atmanirbhar. Next question is from somebody called Interpretation. How far the Actist policy will revive the Indian economy? What I think, and all of you have to keep in mind, somehow the eastern part of India has been completely ignored in terms of connectivity. And I'm talking of the region of East, which includes right from Bihar to West Bengal to Assam and all the northeastern states. Most of the states have not developed, partly because your connectivity or our connectivity is totally limited. We are in the northern side, we are not connected with China. In the eastern side, we are not connected with Southeast Asia. So because of that, the development which could have taken place in that region, that has not happened, unfortunately. We have talked a lot about the BIMSTEC, etc. But even the progress in BIMSTEC is very, very slow. The connectivity projects have not taken place. We talked about Ganga Mekong, the connectivity project, but what has happened, nobody knows. So, the northeastern part of India and eastern part of India, we are the losers because we have failed to connect either from the northern side or from the eastern side. So we need to focus, we need to pressurize the government to build, networks, road connectivity, railways with Myanmar, with Thailand, with Nepal, with Bangladesh, so that region develops. And now Bangladesh is developing, so we need better connection with that region. So that is about the Actist. Yeah, about Actist also in Southeast Asia, we decided not to become part of RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, because China was a member and Australia was also a member, Japan also a member. But we decided because we thought that that will lead to a lot of Chinese products coming to India. But now what is happening that we also fear that some of the goods that we are producing might not be competitive with the Southeast Asian products, but somehow if we want the trade agreements with other countries, few things will lose and few things will gain. This will lead to some kind of increased quality production if we open up our market with Southeast Asia. And ultimately, we are talking with Southeast Asia, we are talking with the European Union, but we have not decided to open the preferential trade or the free trade agreement with any of the regions. So India needs to rethink. Some of the people argue that India should open up with Southeast Asia, not through the RCEP, but maybe through bilaterally, and we should have free trade agreement with many of the countries in Southeast Asia. So that will definitely have positive impact on India, and more so in the eastern part of India if we are well connected. Next question is from Robin Hazarika. He is asking, is present policy of leading India away from the neighbors? I think the present policy of Narendra Modi or the NDA government it has mixed results. It has mixed outcome. In some of the places, see, there is no doubt that Prime Minister Modi visited all the countries. He tried to activate the neighborhood connectivity, etc. But somehow we are still lagging behind. We did pretty well in Sri Lanka. Prime Minister Modi's visit after he became Prime Minister second time, to Sri Lanka and Maldives, the first visits. So that was very important. Even Rajapaksa, the return of Rajapaksa in Sri Lanka, he said that he would not like to play China against India. So he started giving a very positive statement in favor of India, and that is a good sign. We also have improved relationship with Ibrahim Soli of Maldives. So Maldives, we are doing pretty well. Bhutan, we have good relation. Bangladesh, because of CRA and NRC, we have kind of created a lot of discontentment in Bangladesh. Otherwise, the Bangladesh government is very favorably disposed towards India. But because of those issues, we are missing out. Tista River, we are not having any agreement. So because of those reasons, we have created some kind of rift with Bangladesh. Recently, there was a news that the Indian ambassador did not get the appointment of a Bangladeshi Prime Minister. She was trying for last 4 months, but she did not get an appointment. So that shows how Bangladesh is also trying to kind of convey a signal to New Delhi that how it has to be very accommodative to the demands and the concerns of Bangladesh. So in terms of neighborhood, we have a mixed outcome. With some countries, we have done well. With Nepal, we have not done well. With Bangladesh, we have created some some problems. With China, as you already know. Afghanistan, we are in a stalemate because we have decided not to talk with Taliban while other countries are talking. Chabahar, Iran, etc. We have. So India, the outcome of this Modi's foreign policy is mixed, as I told you. In some places, we have got this favorable, and some places we have created concerns. And the next question by Robin Hazarika is that is India giving importance to only United States? And is that leading to some kind of alienation of the neighbors? There is no doubt that India is giving a tremendous importance to its relationship with the United States. But at the same time, India is also careful. We know that how, as Padita pointed out, that how India cannot completely rely upon United States, because that might lead to many problems in the region. It will lead to problem in Iran. It will lead to problem in with Russia, and it will lead to because if you see the history of US, the way Pakistan was adopted by United States and the way it was abandoned in the future. So what matters for the United States is the commerce and the national interest. So if national interest goes with the China, tomorrow China can also be a good partner with United States. So India has to have a hedging strategy where it will create a hedge against China with the US, but again, would be very, very careful. Next question is the social reforms affecting this is by Dr. Tapan Kalita, that whether the social reform policy is impacting India's relationship with neighbor. Probably he is referring to CAA and NRC. So what I think is that India's this policy of CAA and NRC, in my view, it was not really necessary at this stage, and this has definitely impacted its relation with Afghanistan and Bangladesh. These two countries, they have stated very clearly that they are not like Pakistan, and they should not have been treated as this category, the way you treat the Islamic Pakistan. So they wanted a different status, and India somehow could not understand the nuances of that kind of diplomacy. And now India is trying to kind of regain its relationship with Bangladesh. Prime Minister Modi was expected to visit Bangladesh in March, but because of coronavirus, it got cancelled. Mujibur Rahman's that centenary, etc. So he did not go, but his idea of visiting Bangladesh was basically to kind of re-establish the good ties that we had with Bangladesh. India cannot afford to lose Bangladesh, because that is key to connectivity project, is key to Act East policy, and is also important for India's Indo-Pacific strategy, and of course economic and trade. So that becomes very, very important for India. Next question is, can India play, by Dr. Tapan Kalita again, can India play a role like non-alignment movement in the emerging bipolarity between United States and and China. So I think, first, India has completely abandoned its policy of non-alignment movement. As you will see, that Prime Minister didn't go for the most of the meetings of non-alignment, also number of meetings. In the online meeting recently, he participated, but otherwise he was not participating. So the policy of India at the moment is not non-alignment. What it calls itself as multi-alignment, where it says that India would like to have a good relation not only with the United States but also with Russia, with Japan, with European Union, and with Australia. And initially, before the conflict with China, it also wanted to have a good relation with China. So it calls it a multi-alignment policy. This again has a lot of problem, this multi-alignment. But basically, the idea is to have a hedging strategy, has a balancing policy, where even if you lose one partner, you will not be completely dependent on the other partner. So it's an Indian way of creating a kind of rebalance in the emerging global uncertainty that you have. So these were the questions that I saw earlier. So if there is any further question, yeah, there is question by Dr. Pankaj Bora. Do you think that India has adopted a policy of avoiding its neighbor small countries like Bhutan, Nepal, etc.? And if so, how will it affect relations with the other countries in the long run? No, India has not actually adopted the policy of alienating neighbors. With Bhutan, we have a very good relationship. As you saw in Doklam, that we decided to even go for conflict with China for Bhutan. So we do not want to lose Bhutan. We do not want to lose Nepal also. But because of the emerging geopolitics, where China has become very assertive, very politically active in Nepal, and ideologically there is ideological affinity between the ruling party of Nepal and China, and because of factional politics, where KP Sharma Oli is with China, and the other party like Nepali Congress, the main opposition party, it gets support from India. So because of that factional politics, now the Nepal's politics appears to be not favorable to India. But in the long term, I believe that we'll continue to have good relations with Nepal also. And the next question is for Padita Mukherjee, so he can answer. Mukherjee sir, do you think? So I think I answered most of the questions. The other questions are for Bappaditya, except one more question. Ansuman Bora Sahab, Rajan sir, what are your future prospects for India in the expanding diplomatic relation with Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan? Yeah, so India has a very good relationship with all the countries of Central Asia. Turkmenistan is not very accessible, it's not very open, so we do not have that kind of relationship. But with Turkmenistan, India was planning to develop, with the help of ADB and United States, the TAPI project, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. But as you know, TAPI project has not taken off very well, so we could not develop that project. With Kazakhstan, we have very good relationship, the supply of uranium, the trade, etc. But in Central Asia, the best relationship that we have at the moment is with Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. So Kyrgyzstan is a kind of emerging democracy. And if you see the recent visits of Uzbekistan, Uzbekistan is the most powerful country in Central Asia, and India has very good relationship. In fact, Uzbek president visited Gujarat for this, for enhancing trade, etc. So Uzbekistan is also trying to balance China and Russia by including India in that region. And Central Asian countries become important because they are very, very small countries, the population of few million people. Uzbekistan is the most powerful and the most populous also. So Uzbekistan would like to engage India, and also because of cultural and historical reasons. As you know, the Babur, etc. Babur was initially from Uzbekistan, Samarkand, Bukhara, etc. That reason. So Uzbekistan has a very good view of India, and Uzbekistan is the closest in terms of Central Asian country too. But of course, we have absolutely no issues with Kazakhstan. We are investing in Kazakhstan. We are investing in a wild field of Kazakhstan. And politically, we also have good relation with Kazakhstan. And Kazakhstan has good relation with Russia. So automatically, the countries which have good relation with Russia also becomes very close to India. So that is the answer. And now I think, these are the questions I could see. So Bappaditya can answer the rest of the questions.
Okay, so the first question that I see here is, it says, Dr. Pankaj Bora asks, do you think India-China relation is more influenced by US foreign policy and US national interest than India's national interest? Yes, that is bound to be the case, because because US is a hegemonic superpower. It has a much bigger market. It is the largest exporter of arms exporter in the world. It has hundreds of bases all over the world. So of course, what the US does vis-a-vis China will have an impact on India-China relations. Now, the thrust of my presentation today was to actually counter the point of view, the prevailing point of view in India today, that is that says that that just because US and China are currently having a difficult relationship, India should take advantage, or this opens up some sort of a new strategic opportunity for India. So India should be, I'm just advising caution on that front, that first of all, India has to make itself valuable to the US. So you have to remember that in the US, from the US mindset, they interact with the rest of the world as a superpower. So that means that they feel, so when they interact with the middle income country like India, they would like some sort of a superior to subordinate relationship. At least, if not across the board, at least in some critical areas where US strategic interests are very importantly implicated. So, for example, if India, for example, were to send troops to Afghanistan as some sort of a peacekeeping or some mission or something to assist US withdrawal, that would so US policymakers, like all other policymakers, they believe in initial linkages. So if you give concessions or if you do something for the US and in certain areas of the world where US national interest is very heavily involved, then US might align with India on certain strategic sectors vis-a-vis China. But again, as I mentioned earlier, US-China relationship is far too deep. There are too many sunk costs. And so despite what has happened over the past 4 years, US trade dependence on China has continued. So there has been some decline, but not to the extent which you would expect given the rhetoric that you hear from both sides. So India should be very careful that when it aligns with, or when it seeks to improve its bilateral ties with the US, the goal should not be as a counterweight to China. Improving ties with the US has a lot of independent benefits. So India has to examine its relationship with the US on a bilateral basis, and if a strategic decision is made that aligning with the US is a good thing for India's national interest, then one has to then be very honest with ourselves that what will be the costs of that alignment. That will not be cost free. US will impose a lot of costs on India, like it has on its other subordinate allies in East Asia. So one should look at the example of Japan, Philippines, and other Southeast Asian nations and their experience with the US alliance, and then India should make a judgment that is India willing to go down that path. But of course, I'm a proponent of free trade, so I believe that India would benefit from having a much more open economy. So that is something that India can definitely do. But for that to be done, Indian policymakers have to take on domestic producers who are demanding protection from American companies and also take on the NGO sector, which is of course very opposed to US giving US companies market access. So those are the sticky issues. So this hedging strategy will only get you so far. So that as long as India continues to practice hedging, then you will be forced to negotiate with China, because you cannot secure yourself against China with a hedging strategy with the US. You have to pick sides, especially if you want US to come to your aid. So that is the first question. I'm sorry I went off on a tangent. Now the other question is from Mr. Mohammed Rahul Amin. Can I think that India has always tried more to establish its relationship with US in comparison to its neighbor China? Now, again, here, as I mentioned, the history of Indo-US relation is very complicated. India has always been very careful. India has never wanted to become a subordinate ally. So it has always seen how US has treated its other allies, and it has learned lessons from that. And based on that, India has always checked itself from taking the path of Pakistan. And so even when a lot of carrots were dangled by the US, India has always resisted aligning closely with the US. So is the current phase we are in, is it going to be different? That we have to see. That will depend on India's negotiations with China. If China continues to be hostile to India, maybe India will be left with no choice. But then that will be a very big adjustment for Indian policymakers and all of us here in India, because then we will see the true face of intrusive US alliance. US alliance comes with costs. It is not. It is not. It is not just benefits all the way. So as I said, India will have to. I'm sorry. I'm getting an echo. So India will have to so I'm getting an echo. So Dr. Tapan Chandra, what do you see India with Iran, India, partner in Middle East, ties with India, influence over India. So again, US has bent over backward way to accommodate India's concerns on the Nepal port issue, and also exempted India from sanctions as far as but there again, US strategic interest wanted that help US in extricating from Afghanistan. That is why US concessions to India and relationship. But the structure of US sanctions regimes, even if the government wants to give exemptions, private players it deters US private firms and private players from doing business with a country that does business with Iran. So that is why now Iran, we can see that Iran is now coming closer to China. So that is where you have to be very clear with the US. So if you want the kind of meaningful alignment with the US, then you will get into the Saudi Arabia or Israel situation, where you will have to then accept a lot of intrusion from the US side, which India and Indian policymakers and the current makeup of strategic commentators here, they are not willing to do. So that is my comment on response. Now the question by Jutika Das. In order to contain China's expansionist tendency, does America's idea of working with like-minded countries or alliance of democracies work? Does China alone can address the challenges posed by China? Does USA alone can address the challenges posed by China? So this is again a point that I raised in my presentation, that the era of democratic alignment is over. US under Trump, and also prior to that, under Obama also, like-minded political institutions, that is like-minded democracies, will not be the basis on which India and US can come together, or other countries can come together. US's closest allies are extremely brutal authoritarian regimes like Saudi Arabia. So that has never prevented the US from aligning with critically important countries who are willing to do the US's bidding. That was true of China as well until recently. So that is why there is no credibility when US tries to impose sanctions on the Hong Kong issue, because US has no credibility on the Hong Kong issue, because US did nothing after the Tiananmen Square in 1989 when there was such a massacre by the Chinese Communist Party to preserve itself in power. So the entire China's trade liberalization has occurred when China was extremely brutal and continued its human rights abuse. It had its problems with Tibet and so on. So human rights or democracy, these kind of normative issues will not be the basis on which US national interest or US alignment or alliances will be formed. US alliances will be formed on give and take, on cost benefit, rational cost benefit calculations. That is where India has to be very clear in its mind that how much of its quote unquote strategic autonomy is it willing to sacrifice. There are benefits from sacrificing your strategic autonomy with the US, but there are costs as well. And the cost will be very visible, because when the US intrusion occurs in various facets of India's policy making and so on, there will be, just like it is happening with China, those kind of tensions will arise with the US as well. So one has to accept, but normative basis of alliances are not valid in international relations today. I think that's about it. Those are all the questions I have.
Sir, hello. Sir,
Hello.
there is another question. Anupam Roy has asked that some scholars believe that a new Cold War has started between US and China.
Bappa, you would like to answer? Bappa, you can answer. New Cold War between. Do you think there is a new Cold War between US and
I do
China?
not agree with that point of view. I think we are still far away from a new Cold War, because we have to see how the technological competition pans out. I have a suspicion that the interconnectedness of the business sectors between US and China are far too deep, and the influence of the business sector on policymakers in the US is far too intrusive. And we will see that play out. I think I'm expecting that in a Biden administration, the people that formulated an open China policy with the US are going to come back to power. So we are going to we'll slowly see backtracking, because as I said, US is currently in a state of imperial overstretch. It just cannot afford to invest the kind of resources that is required to take on China in East Asia, in various theaters all over the world, and also revive its struggling economy that has been devastated due to the COVID crisis. So unlike the Cold War, where US was at its peak of economic and military power in the early 50s, and there was a clear ideological division between the Soviet Union and the US, and there was clear territorial hegemony that both major powers had over different parts of the globe. So there was a carving out of the globe by the two nations during the Cold War. That has not occurred. So it is too early to say that we are in a Cold War right now. So Indian policy has to be based on the expectation that at some point we will definitely see some sort of a rapprochement between US and China, and India should be prepared for that. If India wants to align with the US, it should be done on the basis of India's national interest, and it should not be done with the expectation that India will be used as a counterweight to China, or India will become a counterweight to China. That is why US will feel India is valuable. India's value will be determined by US according to its specific strategic interests. Like Afghanistan, for example, is a pressing issue. If India were to align with what the US wants in Afghanistan, that will be a major breakthrough. If India agrees with most of the tariff issues, retaliatory tariffs that are holding up trade deals with US and India. That will be another breakthrough. So those are the things. If those are the concessions that Indian policymakers are willing to make, India-US relations are going to become very close. But to expect in the US to take on China to the extent that India is expecting is overly optimistic, in my view.
Thank you, sir. Rajan sir, would you like to add anything, sir?
I think Bappa has answered it very well. So I agree with him more or less that this is not a kind of Cold War, and US is not going to come to rescue for a rescue of India. In fact, the recent, if you take the Indian media, so it kind of hypes up the news, and there's a lot of news that US is coming for the help of India in Galwan, etc. But my view is that US is very, very careful, that it will only go to the extent that its national interest is being served. In the South China Sea, US has its limitation. It knows that US cannot do it alone. So there, US is looking for a partner. And in my view, India should not become the foot soldier of United States, not the frontline soldier of United States, because that will create a lot of problem in the region, and we are not really prepared for that. So India has to maintain a very balanced strategy decided by its own national interest and not determined by the interest of the United States.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for such an engaging lecture and taking all the questions. Now I would like to request Dr. Rajibul Alam, Head Department of Political Science, PN College, Thubri, to offer the vote of thanks. Over to Dr. Rajibul Alam, sir.
Hello, Bhutan. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you. I, Dr. Rajibul Alam, Head of the Department of Political Science. On behalf of the Department of Political Science, BN College, Dhubri, offer my heartfelt thanks to the Honorable Research Person, Dr. Ranjan Kumar, Sir, Associate Professor, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. My sincere thanks to the respected research person, Dr. Padita Mukherjee, Sir, former visiting professor, the State University of New York, US. Hope this webinar enriches our knowledge. The webinar has become a reality because of the active participation of the fellow teachers and our students. My heartiest thanks to all of them. I also offer my sincere thanks to our principal, Sir, Dr. Dhruva Chakraborty, IQAC coordinator, Dr. Sushmita Sengupta, and members of BN College for their active cooperation and help in organizing this webinar. Last but not least, I express my heartiest thanks to Dr. Gautam Roy, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, for his active participation in arranging the webinar. I express my gratitude to all of you. Thank you. Thank you, Gautam.
Thank you, Dr. Rajibul Alam. Almost we have crossed 2.5 hours. Now we are actually we need to call off the program. On behalf of the VN College Thubri, I sincerely offer my heartfelt thanks to all the participants for listening to us and actively participating in the webinar. I sincerely thanks Dr. Rajan Kumar and Dr. Padita Mukherjee for engaging, for enlightening so much issues and dynamics of India's foreign policy. And we sincerely hope that all the participants have benefited from their lecture. And we sincerely hope that in near future, if we organize any seminar or webinar, we will definitely will get their support. With this, I declare this webinar end. Thank you, all of you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. It was lovely meeting all of you. Thank you. Thank you and bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye,
Thank
sir,
you.
Rajan, sir.
everyone.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
No.
Bye, sir. Bye, sir.